Alright, we are back to show you the disassembly of the screen portion of this phone after I removed the back off of it, which is a challenge. I'm just going to show you some of the tools we're going to be using to actually go ahead and remove this screen from the phone itself. I'll have to undo a few connectors. You can see that I have this replacement screen here showing you the two connectors we're going to have to undo. One is right here on the side, there's two pieces of black tape covering it, and the other one is underneath looks like one of the connectors here. So the first thing we're going to go ahead and start doing is removing the black tape off this side connector here. Once you start taking the back of this phone, it looks pretty complicated, although it's not as difficult as it seems. It's fairly straightforward. The one tricky thing is just making sure that on the flip connectors here that you don't flip too hard and take your time to go ahead and remove them as you go through. So we're going to go ahead and flip this first connector up, just like so. We're going to go ahead and remove this bottom piece of black tape here as well. Now, I do want to reuse this black tape, so I'm being careful not to rip it. Although if you do, it's not too crazy. I've used some Scotch tape in the past to replace some of these small tapes on the back of the phone. Just don't use a ton of it, just enough to hold what was in place. So here's our first connector undone. Let's go ahead and pull that back. I'm going to go ahead and start removing the tape off this other side. We have to remove this first connector to get to the screen connector underneath it. Let's go ahead and just pull the black tape that's holding this back on. I'm going to use a pair of tweezers to help me out here. And pry this back. We'll go ahead and flip this connector up as well. So just prying forward on it. Right in the middle is the goal to remove these connectors. They can be somewhat tricky, so every once in a while you can see that it's flipped up now. It's being a little bit tricky on the side here. Flip back down, so I'm just going to pull right back up. There we go. We'll pull the cable out, just like so. Now we have some of this metal fiber tape right below it. We're going to go ahead and pull back. This stuff never wants to re-stick very well, so try to be careful as you pull it up. Try to get as much of the adhesive to stick to the tape as you pull it up. And to do that, if you start in a corner of the tape, make sure that when you start pulling it off that the adhesive is coming with it. If not, try a separate corner of the tape itself. I really don't like this tape just because it can't be reused, and I don't have anything like it to use in its place. Using a pair of tweezers to help pry this up. Maybe if we can get it to start here. Another thing that's a problem with this fabric tape is if you don't get a good portion of it, it will rip. Just kind of like ripping a shirt. So just cautiously pulling this tape back, and that'll reveal our connector underneath, which is the one that we are looking for. We're just going to pry this flip part up as well. You can see this actually flipped the opposite direction as we pulled it out. And then one last connector down here at the bottom as well. This would actually be the battery connector. Definitely a lot of copper tape on here. Looks like it's for heat dispersion. just trying to keep all of my parts in order. So I'm drawing a small diagram here of where the cables actually interconnect. On the back of this HTC phone, it was a little weird with where all the ribbons connect. So I like to draw a diagram, just like a dry erase marker on my work area. Help me out and help me keep my screws in order as well. So if you, one thing I'll do a lot is draw a square, and then put the screws onto that, like the rectangle that I drew that's supposed to represent the phone, of where they came out from, so I can replace them right in the exact same spots. A lot of the screws are not the exact same size, so being tricky. Connector didn't pry out, so we're going to go ahead and pry the battery connector off here just real fast. It's being a little bit stingy, so I'm just prying on both sides, being very careful to give it equal amounts of force on both, and not really pry too hard to get it to remove. It looks like it got loose. I just don't want to always have to pull up with that dental pick. Alright, making good progress. So we have all of our connectors out. We have a few screws around the side here that we need to make sure we remove. There's two at the top and two at the bottom. There's a fabric connector, fabric piece of tape here, so I'm going to go ahead and peel this back. It has to be hiding a connector here that we'll have to remove before we take this board out. Now, it doesn't look like you have to remove this particular board to replace the LCD, although I find, looking at it, it looks like this is going to really truly be the easiest way to do it. So removing that top screw there. I'll screw down the side here. And that'll give us access to removing the connector. Drawing a diagram of where these cables go that I'm taking off. There's a gray and a blue one. The gray is smaller. The gray one is smaller and it goes to the inner portion. The blue one is to the outside portion. Just pulling these back. Another piece of metal fabric tape that we're just going to pry back and see if there's anything underneath it that we need to be aware of. There's another connector here. Just prying this black piece forward to lift the connector out. Nice flat tool to get as much surface area so I don't break that connector. It's very important that you don't do that. You cannot replace those ribbon cable connectors. Prying up another wire connector at the bottom here. Doesn't have to be done all the way. We're just going to move it out of the way. Just pry that connector back. Just looking to see what screws I need to remove this board off of the chassis here. So here's our first screw that we're going to remove at the top. It's going to make sure I write down where these screws are coming out at. I actually have a magnetic dry erase board, which is fantastic to use when you're repairing phones. So you can put the screws on there and they never get lost, and then you can write on it and see where those screws come from. I highly suggest if you're going to repair more than just one phone that you get that. If you're just doing one or two, it's not a big deal, but after a while they start to kind of blend together. You need to be very careful of where all these go. There's a little connector right here at the top, a little wire connector we removed right next to the camera. We do undoing 3 screws at the bottom here. That should give us access to go ahead and remove this board. I'm going to pry it up a little bit. Didn't want to just come out. I'm just checking to make sure there's no other screws in there. And there must be some adhesive behind it. Looks like it's down here in this corner is where that adhesive is at. This is where it's having a hard time coming out. So it's being very careful, not prying underneath it, but just trying to pull upwards. See, we're starting to make a little bit of progress on the board coming up. You can see that it's still being held in. So make sure all the ribbon connectors are out of the way and pull the board up nice and slow. Definitely don't want to hurt it in any way. Just going to use a flat spudger to get underneath it and give it a little extra tug forward. See if we can't start making some progress with it. Looks like this screw may need to come out down here as well. That's the third screw that I was discussing, and I said the 3 at the bottom. We do have some separation here as well. I'm starting to get a little bit more. Just looking underneath it to see where it's actually being adhesed. There's some tape down here at the bottom. I'm just going to try to pry forward with my pry tool here. That's what's holding this bottom portion on. Try to use my dental prick to help us free it. You can see the tape right there that was holding it down. And there we go, and we have that free. You're looking good. Just checking to see if there's anything else that's holding this battery in before we go ahead and try to remove it. A couple pull tabs on it, so it looks like they're perforated, so we definitely don't want to pull them too much. I don't want to rip this pull tab off the battery. Looking to find the best angle to try to pry this battery out. It definitely is adhesed to the rear panel here. Use a flat spudger to help us out. Pulling it in here at the bottom. You want to be careful when you start prying this battery out. The sides of this phone are plastic, and these are where the clips actually clip the back frame onto the phone. So as you pry around it, you don't want to put a lot of force into it. Make sure it starts giving before you start putting more in. I'm going to use an additional pry tool here to help us gain a little extra access to the battery itself. And there's a lot of adhesive on the back of this. You can hear it starting to crack and pop as you start to pry it off. It scares a lot of people when you start prying a battery and it starts cracking and popping. It's truly fine. Just try not to deform the battery too much as you remove it. Definitely do not puncture the battery. So on the other side, see if we can't gain a little bit more access to it here. Making sure not to pry too far down at the bottom, but we want to get our spudger underneath it and then pull up. And that's the key. So I'll slide my spudger in and then I'll pull upwards to help it separate instead of going down. We definitely do not want to pry against the plastic connectors on the side of the phone here. Just try to slide my tool lengthwise and just pushing it to help separate the glue. Down the middle. Try to get it on the side here as well. Still having a little bit of separation issue here at the top of this side of the battery. Working my way along nice and slow, just really trying to get the separation. Definitely a lot of the battery on the back is still adhesed to the mid frame, so I'm pulling up and trying to get the separation that I'm looking for. I don't want to pull too hard. I don't want to rip the housing of the battery. With this particular, with how much adhesive is on the back of this, you can use a little bit of heat to make the job a little bit easier. Although be very cautious with how much you do. The goal is to just put enough on to remove it. And normally the battery is fully wrapped all the way around. And you can see with those perforated pull tabs there that it possibly is not. And the back of this battery actually is folded underneath. And that's really what's holding the phone together, or the battery back in. So it's just one of the flaps has come off of the battery and is holding itself in. There we go, and there's the flap that was holding it in as well. Just going to try to push it back down and flatten it out. Make sure the battery is still nice and flat before we go to the trouble of starting to re-adhere it to the phone. Alright, now we have the battery removed. We can see the access to the LCD is just right below here. There are two foam little pieces that I'm looking at really close right here that actually are underneath the battery. It looks like we'll have to remove them. Just going to try a dental pick and see how that works for us. See if they're adhesed on there very well, or if there's kind of some foam connectors that'll separate the battery from the LCD screen. And it looks like they are on there pretty good. So I will wait and see if we can't remove the LCD and then mess with them then. Before we go too much further with trying to pry those off. Let's just try the other side of it here real quick and see if it has the same problem. Which it definitely does. Try a flatter surface spudger. That did not work out for me. Just looking at it nice and close before I start trying to remove the LCD. I definitely don't want to damage the new one when I put it in. So just double checking to see how this one is input, how it passes through the back of the phone. Now, one thing that might help you, depending on how shattered your screen is the suction cup. This is pretty adhered to the bezel. You can use this to help pull it forward and gain some separation between the phone and the glass. Now, the reason why I'm using the suction cup in this particular one is I want to save the front portion of this. Most housings I get when I do like the Galaxy 3s or the Notes, you don't necessarily have to save the bezel as I get a new one because they're usually pretty dinged up and damaged, whereas this one, this front portion is fantastic. So I'm going to make sure I try to keep it. And so I'm just going to use a suction cup and pull to get some separation between the LCD and the glass, and I'll use a plastic pry tool in there to start to help the separation process. Now this is just stuck in with some 3M double-sided sticky tape around the sides of the screen, so you can just use a couple plastic connectors. You could use a little bit of heat if you wanted to help you remove the screen from the mid-frame, although I don't find it's really necessary. I definitely don't want to melt the sides. I've seen that happen with some of the iPads replacing the LCDs, that it gets a little hot, and when you try to use your tool to remove it, it deforms to a degree. So I'm just going to use my plastic pry tools and move them down the side of the phone here and just separate that tape from the LCD. So use a plastic pry or a metal pry tool to get a little glue out here. Put it underneath. I'm definitely not worried about damaging this display, as it's definitely shattered. So I would never use a metal spudger on an actual functional display. Make sure you're only using plastic pry tools, the plastic razor blades or these guitar picks, or those metal, the blue or green little plastic pry tools you see coming in a lot of phone repair kits. It's going to pull it away. Still have some glue on this other side, so we'll slide our dental pick all the way down the bottom. You can see that it definitely came free here. The bottom is still pretty adhesed to the bottom of the mid frame on this phone. It's going to pull back. It doesn't want to come off, so we're going to try to pry it off with a dental pick. Not a lot of luck here, so we'll just go ahead and use a metal razor blade to cut the glue between the LCD and the phone. And there you go, we have the LCD separating from the mid frame after you just cut this last piece of glue. Definitely not extremely difficult to remove the LCD. Like I said, I'll be doing a full housing replacement, so you can see how we can swap every component out of the HTC one. See the dent in the back. We want to remove these foam pads to the new LCD as well, and we'll do that in our next video. If you want to go ahead and watch the reassembly of this, the attachment of the new LCD and digitizer, go ahead and click the link in the bottom right hand side of your screen. And thanks for watching the video, guys, and I'll see you on my next one.